In my previous life, I was swept away by a flood while protecting my sister. Years later, when we reunited, our parents framed me to take the fall for her. In prison, I died with hatred in my heart, my soul witnessing their evil deeds. Dying was fine with me, as long as Cherry was safe. But when I opened my eyes again, I had returned to the day of the flood. I pried each finger of my sister's hand open, smiling wildly. Hold your breath, I'm letting go now. The day after I found out I was the protagonist in a novel, I was reborn. Vivian. Hold on to me. I don't want to die. In the midst of the storm, Cherry clung to my hand desperately, leaving bloody marks on my skin. A shiver ran through me as I abruptly realized I was no longer a soul, but had truly returned to the day my twin sister Cherry went missing. Just as I felt a flicker of joy, the wooden beam beneath us started to crack. We were trapped. The rain continued to pour down, the water rushed like a waterfall, and the beam would soon give in. In my previous life, I had tried to save Cherry, pulling her up onto the beam, but the first thing she did once she got up was to push me back into the water. Vivian, this beam is so narrow, it can't hold both of us. So why don't you be generous and let me have it? Before I could even process my shock, the raging water swept me away. When I woke up, I had injured my head in the rapids and ended up in a remote mountain village, confused and isolated. I was beaten, insulted, living a life worse than death. 15 years later, my biological parents took me back and supported my education. I thought they were making up for lost time, but it turned out all their affection was just to make me take the fall for my sister's hit and run. Vivian, it's not that your mom and I are biased, we've invested so much in Cherry over the years. She's so young, has such a bright future ahead, and is about to marry the richest man in town. She can't waste her youth in prison. Yes, Vivian, it's just a few years in prison, we'll take care of everything. Once you're out, we'll bring you back home and take good care of you. Their sincere attitude made them seem like the perfect parents looking out for their daughter. But even in my muddled state, I knew going to prison wasn't a good thing. I struggled to run, but the bodyguards they brought pinned me down and dragged me to the police station to take the blame. The verdict came quickly. Since Cherry and I were identical twins, our looks were almost indistinguishable. With some makeup, no one could tell the difference. I spent 5 years in prison, but my days were far from what my parents had promised. Because of my frail body, I became a target of bullying. I was forced to do the filthy, hard work, and endured endless beatings. Every month, my sanitary products were confiscated. In their care, I even inexplicably lost a kidney. Maybe out of fear of karma, they gave me some money when I got out, but by then, I was a shell of a person, and soon died with hatred in my heart. After my death, my soul returned to the Liu family. Only then did I learn that everything I suffered in prison was orchestrated by Cherry. A fool like you, my sister. Trying to claim a share of the inheritance? Even though it was she who insisted on going out to buy snacks in the heavy rain, I had followed to ensure her safety, only to be swept away by the flood. Vivian. Vivian. Pull me up. The rain splashed so hard I could barely see Cherry's face. She was shouting desperately, struggling to pull herself up by grabbing onto me. The sharp pain of her nails scratching my skin snapped me back to reality. Looking at her still youthful face, I couldn't help but smile more broadly. Aren't you thinking this beam is too thin to support both of us? Thinking you'll get up here and then push me down to save yourself? A look of shock flashed in Cherry's eyes, followed by the embarrassment of having her thoughts exposed, but after all, she was still a child, not yet mature. She naturally asked when in doubt, stammering, "How? How did you know?" Of course I knew. Because I'm thinking the same thing. As if guessing what I was about to do, Cherry went pale. Vivian. Don't. I'm your sister. Your flesh and blood sister. Now she remembers we're flesh and blood sisters. I raised my hand in a shushing gesture, then slowly pried open her exhausted fingers as she watched in horror. Hold your breath, Vivian's letting go now. Cherry disappeared. From then on, there was only one child named Vivian at home. Parents posted missing persons ads and asked around, while I cried my eyes swollen in my room. Not out of sadness, but joy. They thought I was devastated by Cherry's disappearance, their hearts softened, and they couldn't bring themselves to scold "It's not your fault. It's Cherry who's too mischievous. If it weren't for her wanting to go out for snacks, you wouldn't have chased her out in the rain. As long as you're okay, we can still have a good life together, the three of us." Parents will always favor the one who stays by their side. It used to be Cherry, but from this moment on, the scales would always tip in my favor. I couldn't help but wonder what Cherry would think if she heard this. One thing's for sure, she wouldn't be happy. Why was I so certain she would come back? Because after I died, a voice in my head told me that my sister and I were protagonists in two different novels. Her story was a feel-good protagonist script. No matter the hardships early on, she would have smooth sailing after turning 20. So, at the latest, she'd be found within 15 years. Mine was a family abuse plot. Though I held the woke character setting, I could never escape the storyline, suffering mentally, physically, and even losing a kidney in the end. I'd rely on spiritual victory, dying to punish the family. But what good did that do? They are still living the high life, not feeling a pinch, not even losing a piece of meat. How does that count as repentance? Luckily, heaven gave me another chance at rebirth. This time, I won't be naive and foolish, letting others manipulate me. Those who hurt me will pay the price they deserve. I spread out a sheet of white paper and began analyzing my situation in detail. In this life, my advantage lies in my physical health and clear mind. Having lived through it once, I know the plot well, which gives me a bit of a head start. The disadvantage is my vision and knowledge, the areas I've never touched in my previous life. So, the next step is naturally to use these 15 years to make up for these gaps, ensuring Cherry can never catch up to me. But this requires strong financial support. I searched my memory and vaguely recalled my past life's experiences. Calculating the years, now is the perfect time to start a business. So, I subtly hinted to my parents that some classmates' parents make at least 30,000 yuan a month. One is snobby, and the other greedy. Otherwise, they wouldn't have sent me to prison just to secure Cherry's marriage into a wealthy family. They discussed it all night, and the next day stopped looking for Cherry and took me to sell mobile phones. They decided to put their daughter's issue aside for now. If the opportunity to make money passed, they might never get rich again. On the roaring train, the whistle sounding long and far. Large fields of wheat quickly swept past my eyes. I rested my chin on my hand, listening to them conspiring loudly, and couldn't help but laugh. Making money oneself is exhausting. It's more satisfying to have enemies work hard to support me. I just wonder how Cherry would react to finding an empty house after all her efforts to return home. She has a knack for getting lost, but no matter how many times she got lost, kind people would always send her back home within half a month. But this time, I've moved the entire family away. My dear sister, how will you come back now? In the warm sunlight, I lazily stretched. 15 years of good times. Let me, Vivian, enjoy it to the fullest. A few years later, with my guidance, my parents successfully started their business. They saw me as their lucky star and spoiled me even more, even giving me 10% of the shares. This wasn't because they loved me that much, but because they believed I could bring them greater profits. By the age of 12, I had already become a well-known little rich girl, always having someone to serve me. But it wasn't enough. I had to prepare for Cherry's return in 8 years. I quietly went back to my old home and found Ted, shirtless, being whipped by my uncle. Money doesn't grow on trees. You're not just freeloading, but not doing any work too. I told you to study. I told you to feed the pigs properly. But Ted was only 10 years old. My uncle's son was eating a hot corn cob, egging his dad to keep beating Ted. Yet Ted remained silent, his back straight, without a hint of fear. This was the second time I met him. The first time was at my grave. After being released from prison, knowing I was beyond saving, I donated all the money my parents sent me to children who couldn't afford to go to school. Ted was the only one among those children to come to the cemetery to pay his respects. By then, He had a successful career while I had been in the grave for 10 years. The daisies he brought freed my soul, allowing me to live anew. I spent 5,000 yuan to buy out his relationship with his aunt and uncle's family. When I handed over the money, disbelief in Ted's eyes turned into shimmering tears. Despite the 2-year age difference, he was a whole head shorter than me. Bent down and reached out to him. "Wanna come with me?" He didn't hesitate. "I do. It's going to be tough." "I don't mind." That determined gaze was something I hadn't seen in a long time. I took off my coat, draped it over his thin shoulders, and led him to the car. Behind us, the greedy uncle's family was still counting the money. They didn't know the notes were sequential serial numbers that I had bought at a high price from a thief. Soon, they would be jailed for theft. I held Ted's hand and led him into the car. At first, he was afraid his dirty clothes would stain the seat and seemed a bit apprehensive. "You are coming home as my younger brother. If you want to be successful, never see yourself as inferior." Ted was startled and then confidently got into the car. As soon as the door closed, a sudden shout came from behind. "Vivian. Is that you?" I felt a headache coming on. Her protagonist's halo was so strong that we even met by chance here. The butler also noticed Cherry and me looking quite similar and murmured, "Who is this?" Before I could speak, Ted's cold gaze swept over and he spoke first. "If it's none of your business, don't ask." I smiled with satisfaction and said calmly, "Since Ted said so, you know what to do." Without further questions, the butler hit the gas pedal and we sped away. Don't worry, I didn't see anything. Behind us, Cherry had already caught up. Just as she grabbed the car door, the mud splashed by the wheels covered her. She stumbled and fell into the snow, completely humiliated. Trying to catch up again, she kept falling because of her oversized shoes. I couldn't help but laugh. Only when her ridiculous figure completely disappeared from view did I look away. Ted was staring at me intently. His hands tightly clenched into fists, with veins bulging under his pale skin. I asked what was wrong. After a pause, he finally said, "I won't let you regret buying Maine the warm breeze." The young boy spoke word by word. "Silly kid, I would never regret it. Because I knew in just 5 years, he would become the best trader. And the sharpest blade I would use against our parents." 8 years flew by. On my 20th birthday, Cherry disguised as a waitress sneaked into the venue. Amid the banal chatter of the guests, she suddenly knelt in front of our parents. Mother was shocked and screamed, "Where did this crazy person come from?" A clear tear slowly trickled down from Cherry's eye. "Dad. Mom. Can't you recognize me? I'm Cherry." She tightly clutched her mother's skirt, her face full of disbelief. In her past life, she was a pampered princess. But in this life, after enduring many hardships, her hands were in tatters. They were like chilblains that had repeatedly flared up without proper treatment, turning into thick scars. Her mother's eyes flashed with a hint of disgust. That look was exactly the same as when she first saw me in the remote village. My past life. Kids are very sensitive to the subtle emotions their parents hide. Cherry froze, feeling as if she had been stabbed. She unconsciously shrank back. The crowd started whispering, "No way, do they have an illegitimate daughter? She does look a bit like Vivian. You must be blind. This waitress is dark and skinny. How can you say she looks like her?" Due to lack of nutrition, in this life Cherry never developed a sexy figure. Not only was her skin dark, but her body was also thin like a bean sprout. I watched quietly from the second floor. Ted appeared timely and whispered, "The security footage has been handled. No one will know it was us who let her in." I responded indifferently and linked arms with him as we walked downstairs. As we got closer, Father had already darkened his face and asked a servant to take Cherry away. He probably recognized her. This was originally the best way to handle things. But Cherry wouldn't have it no. In the crowd, she suddenly screamed and pushed over the huge champagne tower. I endured so much suffering outside for over 10 years, I finally made it back. "Why won't you recognize me?" She wanted to make a scene, forcing them to acknowledge her identity publicly. But what she didn't know was that gatherings of the rich were not just parties. they were opportunities for business deals. Her parents wanted to finalize an important deal today. Naturally, they wouldn't tolerate any disruptions. Besides, she also wanted to drag me down. Vivian. Where's Vivian? It was Vivian who pushed me into the water back then. Mom, Dad, you have to stand up for me. She hastily accused me. But before she could finish, a clear slap landed on her dark, chapped face. How dare you slander my daughter in front of everyone? Have to admit, the old man reacted pretty quickly. In such a setting, my interests were tied to theirs. Slandering me was like slapping them in the face. So I didn't have to lift a finger. Father would naturally stop her. Seeing that things were almost out of hand, I parted the crowd and helped the stunned Cherry up. As I bent down to brush off the dust, I softly warned her in her ear, "Do you think Mom and Dad would believe you? A coarse girl from the countryside could never be more important than the carefully cultivated daughter, right?" I returned the exact words she had said to me in our past life. Cherry shuddered, realizing our vastly different fates. Like a wilted chick, she was dragged out by security, called in by Ted. My parents' faces were grim, so I consoled them and started the string performance I had prepared. The party quickly became lively again. Everyone praised me for being kind and graceful. Even a few aunties warmly asked if I was married. In this circle, gossip and scandals are just topics for conversation. Benefits are the eternal rulers. I responded to them all, presenting the image of a perfect lady. Afterwards, I took my parents to a suite to rest. Mother patted my hands softly and sighed, "Thank goodness for Vivian. How could your sister, born on the same day, be so clueless?" Father grumbled quietly, causing trouble the moment she returned. I wish she had just died outside. Their first reaction to their suffering daughter was blame. I glanced at Cherry hiding behind the screen. Even I found such parents cold-hearted. Let alone someone who had returned with full of hope like her. Soft knives cut the deepest. Sure enough, I saw her shadow shake, almost collapsing. Suppressing a laugh, I pretended to comfort them. "Don't say that, Cherry is family after all." Father sighed, "Fine, let's take her home and let Vivian teach her." Their European project was about to start, so they had no time for Cherry. I smiled, "Don't worry, leave her to me." The simple rule of karma. I had been waiting to teach her for a long time. My parents settled Cherry in the old house, and the next morning, left with Ted for France. When I got up, I heard Cherry arguing with the maid. "Wendy, what do you mean, throwing my clothes away?" Wendy sneered, "Sorry, Vivian is a clean freak. Once others have worn them, she won't wear them again." After the party last night, the butler went to fetch Cherry's luggage. But she waved grandly and said, "Do you know who I am now? How could those shabby clothes be worthy of me?" She burned her old clothes piece by piece in front of the butler. So last night, she had to wear my pajamas. But this morning, she saw Wendy throwing her pajamas into the trash. Cherry grabbed Wendy, demanding an explanation. "I only wore it once, how is it dirty?" Wendy sniffed and muttered, "You know very well why it's dirty, don't you? 20 years ago, Wendy's husband ran away with a sex worker, leaving their mentally ill son behind, reliant on her. According to Ted's investigation, before coming back, Cherry worked at a nightclub. Last night, I casually mentioned this to Wendy. Sure enough, she blew up today." The two argued fiercely. Cherry yanked Wendy's hair and slapped her. Wendy fought back. She's a distant relative of Mother and used to being a tyrant. Though she dared to not openly insult, she stealthily pinched Cherry, leaving red marks. I remembered when I briefly stayed at home in our past life. Wendy, instigated by Cherry, humiliated me in every way possible. Back then, foolish me thought anyone who gave me moldy bread was a good person. I knocked on the glass door, the crisp sound bringing them to their senses. Wendy stood there, looking flustered. "You," I said, "will have a month's salary deducted." Cherry, feeling smug, turned to Wendy. "Did you hear that? You're nothing but a dog. You think you can challenge me? You're tired of living?" Before she could finish, I spoke again, "And you're not allowed to leave the house for a month. Cherry was dumbfounded. Why? She demanded. Because I said so. In this house, my word is law. Wendy joined in with a sarcastic laugh. A farmed chicken really thinks it's a phoenix. In our previous life, they were loyal servant and mistress, but now they clashed, which I found quite satisfying. Holding a ticket for a trip to Venice, I quietly turned away, ignoring their latest round of bickering. A month was plenty of time for them to fight like cats and dogs. I had a lot of faith in Wendy's combat skills. When I got back from my vacation, Cherry's face was a mess of acne, making her already less than stellar looks even worse. My father, appalled upon seeing her red, swollen face, ordered her to eat separately in the kitchen, saying her appearance ruined everyone's appetite. I had to pinch my thigh to stop myself from laughing out loud. Carrying her bowl, Cherry shot me a venomous look, as if to say, just you wait. But she soon found a new battleground. My parents arranged for her to attend the same prestigious school I went to. At the opening ceremony, as the representative of the returning students, I got up to give a speech and found a squashed dead frog in my notes. It was small, but enough to make me furious. Cherry, in the audience, shot me a triumphant, malicious grin. Only she knew how much I hated slimy, slippery creatures. But these tricks were outdated. In my previous life, after I was found, my parents put me in her class. Back then, Cherry had secretly put some dead frogs in my backpack. The cold, clammy feel triggered the trauma I carried from living under a bridge, and I ended up screaming in class, solidifying my reputation as a fool. I was isolated, gossiped about, and bullied throughout my brief school life. My parents even had me take the fall for her wrongdoings. But this life would be different. Years earlier, I had rented a damp basement and forced myself to stay with such creatures. The first time, I lasted only half an hour. When Ted pulled me out, I was pale but insisted on going back in. Over 3 months, I overcame my fear of amphibians. I smirked, calmly closing the folder with my speech notes, and took the microphone. I'd like everyone to understand this. Words become clean only when filthy ones are spoken aloud. Revenge taken on the spot maintains a higher standard of manners. As soon as I finished, I rushed towards Cherry in the audience. Before she could react, I grabbed her lower jaw and shoved the dead frog into her mouth. Cherry's eyes widened in shock. Clutching her throat, she retched. "What did you make me eat?" I glanced at her. "What else but what you put in my speech notes?" Tears sprang from her eyes. "What? You made me eat a dead frog." Drawing out my words, I said, "So you admit it was you who put it there?" For a moment, Cherry was speechless, her gaze evasive. "When did I admit anything? You're my sister, how can you accuse me?" Funny how she called me sister when convenient and not when it wasn't. I sneered, "I never said what I made you eat. If you didn't put it there, how would you know it's a dead frog?" At that, Cherry's face turned white. Anyone attending a school as prestigious as ours was sharp enough to know what was going on. Oh my God, this is the fastest karma I've ever seen. Vivian's move was so badass. From now on, she's the only sister I recognize. The situation was quickly investigated. Turns out, Cherry sneaked the dead frog into my notes while the teacher was discussing the podium order with me. There was video footage of her casually committing the act, unaware that the infrared camera's red light was only visible when ambient light levels dropped below a certain point. Cherry thought the camera wasn't on because the light wasn't visible. The principal gave her a severe reprimand right on the spot. I, on the other hand, was praised publicly for embodying the school's spirit of assertive education. Of course, this news reached my parents. Without a word, my father slapped her. "I sent you to school to cause trouble? Can't you learn from Vivian and save us some grief?" My mother wanted to defend her but saw me compulsively washing my hands since I got home, as if traumatized by the dead frog, and she joined in the scolding. "Good thing it just scared you. If anything happened to Vivian, you'd be in deep trouble." At our last party, several industry bigwigs had hinted at commercial marriage alliances with me. In such times, my parents would naturally take my side first. That night, Cherry was punished with time out. When I went to the bathroom later, she was still crying in the corner. I didn't bother looking at her but couldn't resist taunting her. Why did you mess with me for no reason? At the freshman ceremony, I became famous after one battle. Cherry, however, became a pariah, the person everyone avoided and mocked for trying to harm others and ending up eating a frog herself. Hence, no one called her Cherry anymore. She was the frog girl. I couldn't help but laugh at that, but things turning out this way meant she had no chance to become the campus queen like she did in our past life. She couldn't form cliques or orchestrate bullying against me this time. Out of options, Cherry had to lay low for a while. But that wasn't enough. She had to suffer, body and soul, to repay for the suffering I endured in the past life. In the evening, I asked Ted to join me for a play and handed him an enrollment letter on the way. Want to be my classmate? 8 years ago, he and I left that hellhole together. I didn't take him home but placed him in one of my apartments. Knowing traditional education was a waste on his genius, I personally selected 10 top industry experts to be his teachers. Talent plus effort. Now Ted has mastered everything from financial mathematics and public speaking to horseback riding, tea ceremonies, and golf. He doesn't need to go to school with me at all. But I need to find a reason for Cherry to keep acting out. He took it with a bit of confusion. Why do you suddenly want me to go to a proper school? I kept a straight face and made something up. I just think it'd be good for you to get an MBA and expand your network after all. You'll be running the Lou Group in the future. He pondered for a moment. You want me to provoke Cherry, don't you? I was taken aback. How is this kid so smart? Even though all his strengths have been developed to match Cherry's preferences, I've never mentioned it to him. But I didn't feel guilty. How did you know? He gave a helpless smile. You're not the type to waste effort on pointless things, yet you're asking me to go through an MBA course I've already passed. The only variable here is Cherry, so I figured it had something to do with her. Besides, you seem to really hate her. Being seen through by someone 2 years younger, I was a bit annoyed. She did some unforgivable things to me. I advise you not to tell me to be gracious, or I'll throw you out of the car. I showed my fist, big as a sandbag. Ted smiled, his warm palm wrapped around my hand and gently pressed it down. I won't. Just 2 words, but with such force. I'll report after I handle the Lou Group stock matters. I lightly leaned on his shoulder, twirling my wine glass. No rush. Cherry isn't going anywhere. He gently acknowledged and took my glass. There's 20 minutes until we arrive. Get some rest. Sure. I obediently closed my eyes. I don't know how long passed, but Ted tilted his head slightly. With my lipstick mark on the rim, he downed the rest of my wine. Then he lowered his head, lost in thought. He thought I was asleep. But I wasn't. I squinted, seeing the blush rise on his ears and slowly fade away. Smiling like a fox that just caught a rabbit. As expected, when the teacher introduced the transfer student Ted, Cherry's eyes lit up. A flash of undisguised amazement filled her eyes, and she perked up like spring water thawing in March. Love letters and chocolates came in waves, and she even offered a high price for Ted to be her boyfriend for a few months. When he didn't agree, she followed him to the restaurant. What do you want to eat? My dad's super rich. I can buy you anything. Seeing her occupy a seat, Ted frowned. This seat is taken. There's no one here. Cherry looked around. She tried to continue chatting, but Ted stood up, sweetly calling out, Vivian. Wow, I didn't know he could act so clingy. I cleared my throat, raising an eyebrow at Cherry. Still not moving? Want me to serve you some frog? Memories of sticky, disgusting things rushed back, making Cherry's scalp tingle. She had to walk away reluctantly. For the next few days, Ted followed me around. Cherry watched it all, grinding her teeth in anger. In this life, Cherry's parents, friends, and even crush are all around me. Given her nature, she'd go mad for sure. Several times, she wanted to lock me in the bathroom like in our previous life to vent her frustration. But with 15 years of Sonda training, getting out of a bathroom stall wasn't difficult at all the first time. Cherry was sweating from pouring water into the stall when I calmly pushed the door open. Working out? The second time, she got smart and locked the next door too. But ended up being locked inside by me, turning into a drowned rat. The third time, she was even more unlucky. The dean was on that floor. They say people are most vulnerable in the bathroom. The dean caught Cherry by the pigtail mid-pants drop and called her father right away. But he was too busy to deal with her, stressed out over the company's stocks being targeted. Her mother couldn't be bothered either. Half a month ago, while Ted and I were shopping, I saw her father enter a hotel with another woman and conveniently sent the photos to her mother, who's now busy catching him red-handed. So, the butler came to school. I fanned the flames. My parents always fought to attend parent-teacher meetings. Why do yours not care about you? Cherry was visibly hurt, biting her lip hard. Didn't you hear the butler? They're just busy. She actually believed it. I suddenly recalled a recording I saved years ago and played it from my phone. It was something I had someone recreate, replicating my mother's words perfectly. It's not your fault. Cherry's just too naughty. If she hadn't insisted on buying snacks, you wouldn't have chased her into the rain. It's okay. We'll live well, just the three of us. The recording ended. I smiled. Hear that? We're a family of three. They don't care about you. Cherry's hope extinguished bit by bit. In this life, she didn't get a high education and lacks vision and knowledge. Such people are easily swayed by emotions and ignore the truth. Sure enough, she screamed "I hate you" and dashed out of the dean's office, disappearing into the rain without checking the recording's authenticity. If you don't hate me, where will I get my revenge satisfaction? Cherry didn't come to school for days, but I didn't expect she was planning something big while she was gone. I synced her purchase records and found she ordered an aphrodisiac hallucination agent. Thinking she might use it to get back at me, I planned to play along. But unexpectedly, her target was Ted. That day, while I was buying up shareholder stocks, Ted called me suddenly. A car's been following me, and I've been feeling hot since just now. I'll have to pull over in 10 minutes. He paused. I think it's that kind of drug. My expression changed, realizing who was following him. No time to waste, I quickly checked his route. There's a car dealership under my name 7 or 8 minutes drive from you. Go there, leave the car, and I'll send someone to take you to a hospital. A suppressed groan came from the other end before the phone was hung up. I asked a friend from a car service to take Ted to the hospital. When I got to Cherry's room, I found remnants of the hallucinogen under the vanity. This packaging looked so familiar. In my past life, Cherry used the same trick. Back then, I wasn't fully aware and got deceived by her to drink a beverage spiked with hallucinogens. When I woke up, I was in an unknown suburb. Wendy's mentally challenged son, Harry, was on top of me, near insane. That night, the wind and rain stirred violently. The night and crimson colors merged into an unbearable memory. Cries and pleas echoed, pounding in my swollen eardrums. I wanted to call for help, but Harry with his violent tendencies broke my fingers one by one. In despair, I prayed my parents would come to save me. But until dawn, my phone lay quietly in the nearby grass. They never cared about my disappearance. After venting, Harry threw my body aside. Only an unknown old lady covered my body with a straw mat. She called the police. But fearing scandals affecting the stock market, they insisted on a secret burial. Then the truth was buried under the yellow earth, and silence enveloped everything around. I gripped that bottle of hallucinogens, my heart trembling violently. I waited for this moment for over 10 years. Just then, Wendy passed by, looking curious. What are you looking for in the room? Need any help? I paused, slowly widening the curve of my lips. No need, Wendy. I remember your son lives near the river, right? An hour later, I stood outside Harry's house and got a call from Ted. I'm fine now. I'll come to you right away. I reassured him, rest well, I'll visit you later. Suddenly, some indescribable noises came from inside the room, making Ted tense up. Where are you? Are you in danger? I could hear him getting out of bed. I quickly told him to lie down. I'm fine. It's Cherry. He breathed a sigh of relief and finally calmed down. I'll wait for you at the hospital. Hanging up the phone, I listened at the wall corner again. This battle was going to take a while. I threw the camera to my subordinate. Capture everything, especially their faces, Cherry. This time, I won't let you off. At the hospital, the smell of disinfectant was overwhelming. I leisurely peeled an apple. Ted looked at me with exasperation. Stop peeling, it's almost just the core left. I looked down and realized I had been too rough with the knife. Then don't eat it. He snatched the apple, leaving just the core. I'm not picky. After saying that, he seemed a bit afraid to look at me. All right, I put down the fruit knife and picked up my bag. Take care of your injuries, I need to make a trip home. He seemed confused. Is there something else? Of course, there's a big show tonight. I randomly ordered a cake online, and when I got home, Cherry hadn't returned yet. Today was my father's 50th birthday, but when my parents came home in the evening, they didn't look pleased. Lately, the company had been plagued by negative news, first about radiation exceeding standards in our jewelry company and then about my father's affair. In just 3 months, the company's market value had evaporated by billions. Everything was fine before, but as soon as Cherry came back. At dinner, I acted casually. I repeated the words Cherry once said to my parents in my past life. My mother started to reflect. It is true, after Cherry came back, she ruined our painstakingly prepared project. Since then, the company's performance has been declining. Could it be like Vivian said, she's here to jinx us? Although my father remained silent, anger was evident in his eyebrows. After a long pause, he called Wendy. Pack her things and have Cherry move to the house in the suburbs tomorrow. There was a crashing sound, something fell to the floor. Looking over, I saw Cherry standing at the door. The rain had soaked her bangs into a series of broken lines. At her feet, a piece of smashed cake lay scattered. No wonder she's the favorite daughter. Even like this, she thought of celebrating Dad's birthday. Before entering the house, she must have carefully protected the cake under her clothes. Maybe she was hoping that Dad, after eating this cake, would treat her as well as before. But would Dad appreciate it? I doubt it. He loves money and status more than his daughter. Dad, what are you talking about? Cherry couldn't believe it, her steps trembling as she approached. I haven't done anything, how could I jinx you? Father glanced at her with disgust. Look at you, where is the dignity of a lady? Whether you're jinxing us or not, by moving you, you're out of sight and out of mind. Mother wanted to plead for her, but a stern look from Father silenced her. Cherry rarely saw her parents. Moving to the suburbs would cut off any chances of bonding. She knelt on the ground, crying and begging Father not to send her away. Her expression was as helpless and pitiable as I was before I was sent to prison in my past life. But would my parents pity her? After dinner, they had Wendy pack her bags. Father's decision was the final straw that broke the camel's back. The last bit of light in Cherry's eyes finally extinguished. She slowly raised her head, her voice full of accusation. Dad, why are you treating me like this? Mom, why won't you help me? I'm Cherry. Since I came back looking like this, you didn't even ask what I've been through and now you're sending me away. When I was little, you said I'd always be your favorite child. Why have you changed? Why are you treating me like this? Father looked at her as if she were crazy. You brought this upon yourself. Since you came back, you've caused me so much trouble. If you were as worry-free as your sister, would we send you away? Who do you think turned me into this? Cherry screamed, suddenly grabbing the table knife and pointing it at our parents. I silently stepped back to give her space to vent. It was you guys, yes, you. When I got swept away by the flood, why didn't you look for me? I waited so long, why didn't you come for me? Everything I'm now, it's all your fault. Actually, our parents did hire someone to search for her for a year, but I had Ted buy off the private detective they hired. So each time, the result was, sorry, still can't find her. Mom, don't worry. For your health, my sister will understand. Plus, the hospital will do everything to ensure the surgery is safe. As expected, Mom thought it through and quickly dialed the phone. A month later, I visited the prison again, this time to oversee Cherry's surgery arrangements. Vivian stood quietly in the prison's visiting room, smiling slightly at Cherry across the table. Long time no see. Cherry's eyes widened with anger. Vivian, what do you want now? Not much, Mom needs a kidney, and I thought. No way. Cherry yelled, cutting her off, you're not taking anything from me. Vivian remained unmoved, responding coldly, doesn't family matter? Mom needs you, you can't refuse. Cherry was stunned, speechless for a moment. In the hospital, Cherry was gradually losing consciousness under anesthesia as Vivian stood by watching calmly. Goodbye, sister. The surgery went smoothly, and when Vivian got home, Mom was sitting on the couch, looking tired. The surgery was successful, Mom, Vivian said with a smile. Mom looked at her gratefully, tears in her eyes. Thank you, Vivian, really, thank you. Vivian just smiled slightly. Mom, it's what I should do. Tony watched everything quietly, understanding that Vivian's plan was more than half accomplished. Everything was under her control. Holding her phone, Vivian called Ted. It's done. Next step, we need to start the company reorganization. Ted's voice on the other end was low and determined. Understood, I'll follow your instructions. Time passed, and under Vivian's leadership, the company gradually got back on track. Though the process was full of challenges, she overcame them with calm and strategy, ultimately winning. The once weak girl had grown into an unafraid, strong woman. But she always knew in her heart, it was all for revenge. Late at night, Vivian stood on the villa balcony, looking at the night sky in the distance, whispering softly, Dad, Mom, Cherry, I hope you're enjoying hell. And this was just the beginning of her revenge. At such a moment, you still can't figure it out? Inheritance or your life, don't you know what to choose? No more words needed. Mom worryingly touched her stomach and finally made up her mind, saying one last sorry. So-called family bonds, just like that. I sneered, got up, and opened the curtains, seeing it was already dusk. Sure enough, the sunset was beautiful. Look at that sunlight, so bright. Not long after, Ted sent an anonymous email to major prosecutors and media. Not only exposing the hospital and prison's trade of prisoners' organs but also including a list of involved personnel with the evidence complete, it quickly drew widespread attention. When the doctors got wind, they were about to place the kidney inside our mother. Fearing exposure, they fled, ignoring the bleeding patient. By the time the police arrived, Mom was already on her last breath and died before the ambulance got there. Of course, Cherry didn't fare any better. They forcibly took one of her kidneys. Although her life was safe, she went insane. After waking up, she pulled out the needle and stabbed it into her own artery, ignoring the staff trying to stop her. The nurse said her last words were, I want to be reborn. I guess she overheard the doctor's chit-chat and realized Mom was the mastermind. In despair, she wanted to change fate just like me. But no one would bring her daisies. You reap what you sow. The day the death news came was my 21st birthday. I opened a bottle of red wine and drank 3 glasses. Thank you, Dad, Mom, and Cherry. Your retribution is the best birthday gift I've received. Congratulations, you finally got what you wanted. Ted took the wine, toasting to celebrate with me. All these years, he's been in the shadows, helping me handle things I couldn't. He did well. I'm grateful to him. But someone must face the consequences for the tricks to bring down the company. The police are already on their way. Sacrifice him or me? The answer is clear. In front of the large floor-to-ceiling window, Ted stood in black, tall and firm. Many years ago, he stood here and promised me, someday, I'll deliver everything you want. Seeming to guess something, he looked at the distant lights, with a tragic and weary glance. I always had a question for you. Ask. I can still grant you this request. I've seen your records. Before me, you considered other kids. Why did you choose me? I thought for a moment and said, because you have talent and were never well treated since childhood. As long as someone is good to you, you'd never betray them easily. After my rebirth, I spent 3 years studying criminal psychology. Ted was my first test subject. He bowed his head, with a bitter smile. I knew it. From the start, you were using me. The police sirens, solemn and steady, had reached the building. We said nothing. Just sat quietly, waiting for darkness to swallow the last light. Before the police entered, he suddenly asked me, "Vivian, who do you think will win?" Before his words fell, a burly man pushed the door open. "Ms. Vivian, we have some questions about the radiation jewelry case and involvement in illegal organ trades. Please cooperate with the investigation." I lifted my eyes to look at Ted. The wolf pup I raised. Finally grown. Between summer and autumn, each autumn rain brings a chill. It's been 15 years since I came back here this time. It's not for revenge. It's to pick someone up. 15 years ago, I was held in a detention center for a few days before being told that the investigation was over and I could go home. Ted took the fall for me. He spent 5 days deliberately exposing previous loopholes, taking all the blame on himself. After the verdict, I went to visit him in prison. Through the glass, I sneered, "Got so brave, even trick me?" He actually laughed, "You can trick me, but I can't trick you." He was referring to me admitting that I had been using him when he asked why I chose him. Indeed, my intentions with Ted weren't pure. But more importantly, evil should be repaid with evil, and good should be repaid with good. That's fair, isn't it? Everything I gave him, from a piece of clothing to the whole company, was to repay that little bunch of daisies. I did contemplate using Ted as a pawn at first. I assigned him everything in the gray area to keep myself clean later, but in 2 lifetimes, the people around me were either bad or rotten. He was the one who showed me the last bit of human kindness. I didn't want to ruin him like that. So at the last moment, I hesitated. I planned to take the blame after revenge and hand the company to Ted. That was my last bit of sentiment. But Ted was too smart. He calculated every flaw perfectly, leaving me no chance to overturn the case. I lost. Completely. I am honored. My heart fluttered. What? He continued, "No matter why you chose me, I'm honored and don't regret it." I suddenly thought of the day I brought him home. "Would you come with me?" "Willing. There will be a lot of hardship." "I'm not afraid." He kept his promise. "One day, I'll give you everything you want." Tears fell onto my lap. When I had a kidney removed back then, I didn't shed a tear. Ted raised his hand, gently brushing my tears across the glass. But it was all in vain. "Don't cry, I can't hold you." It was the first time he admitted anything yet nothing at all. I couldn't hold back anymore. "Why, even though it's me?" He stopped my words, and tears welled up in his eyes too. "Remember, everything I did has nothing to do with you. After today, don't come back." He gave me a deep look, then turned away. I haven't seen him for 15 years. My thoughts snapped back. The gate opened, and a familiar figure walked out. I waved at him. Under the black umbrella, those amber eyes were still clear. I walked up slowly, and 2 steps away, slapped him in the face. He took the chance to pull me into his arms. Raindrops fell on the umbrella, making a pitter-patter sound. I couldn't hold back anymore and cried on his chest. 15 years had passed, I could no longer resist time. Fine lines had appeared at the corners of my eyes. Ted had also become more mature and steady. But as we embraced, there was not a single feeling of unfamiliarity. "I missed you so much." He held me with one arm and held the umbrella with the other, speaking first. "After prison, you've become more talkative." I laughed, hugging him tighter. "Me too. I missed you more than you think." Autumn wind blew, leaving a warm patch on my neck. To me, everything was no longer a desolate silence. We held hands and walked slowly towards home. The road ahead might still be full of hardships. But I knew, on this road, someone would always be with me. I wasn't lost. Or afraid. Ted's epilogue, that kid's so stubborn. The neighbors always added that when talking about Ted. He lost his father at a young age, and after his mother went to the big city to work, she never came back. His aunt's family had to take him in. Life under someone else's roof wasn't easy. His uncle saw him as a burden and gave him all the dirty, heavy work to do, while feeding him food that was scarcely better than pig slop. Due to malnutrition, he was a lot skinnier than kids his age. Every time his cousin bullied him, all he could do was crouch down and protect his head at first. He hoped his aunt would notice the bruises on him. But after it happened enough times, he realized she was turning a blind eye. After all, she had her own family to care for. Giving him a meal was already a great kindness. He didn't blame her. Every day, Ted's biggest joy was reading with the mad teacher next door. Village folks said the teacher had studied too much and lost his mind, but Ted found the way he talked about numbers very intriguing. That tiny world was his only escape from suffering. Later, when compulsory education was enforced, his uncle had no reason to keep him from school. Thanks to his outstanding grades and help from the villagers, Ted made it all the way to high school. But for college, his uncle flatly refused. "I have no money. Go find whoever's son you are for money." Even though his father's pension was in his uncle's hands, his uncle insisted Ted should go work and give up the college spot to his son, who couldn't even score 20 points to prevent Ted from appealing. His uncle went so far as to break his leg. Ted was 18 that year. He wasn't strong enough to escape that crushing mountain, no matter how hard he tried. But when he was on the verge of collapse, a foundation found him. Someone anonymously donated funds for his college education. He didn't know who it was, but he knew it was an opportunity he had to seize. He took nothing with him and left that very day, hiding his identity and never returning. He was smart, finishing all his courses in just a year. With his uncanny sensitivity to numbers and financial products, by the age of 20, he was already a stock trader making millions every second. For the next decade, everything went smoothly for him. But one question constantly haunted his mind: where was the person who helped him escape that mountain now? He spent a fortune to find out, but when he excitedly got the address, it turned out to be a cemetery. He brought a bouquet of daisies to visit her. They said she was already 20 when she died, but the girl in the photo looked about 5 or 6, presumably a family photo with no adult ones. Ted's heart suddenly ached terribly. The person who had helped him didn't get the happiness she deserved. He didn't know how long he stood there when it started to rain lightly. The weather forecast hadn't predicted rain, but Ted felt it was fitting, as if heaven was mourning her fate. "If there's a next life, let me protect you." He placed the flowers down, stayed a while longer, then left. He didn't notice the raindrops, mixed with the scent of flowers, slowly seeping into the gravestone. Ding! System activation. Do you want to change your fate? The day before my release, a young guy who hadn't been in long asked where I was going. He said things outside had changed a lot and worried I wouldn't know how to take the bus. I thanked him while packing my stuff and told him not to worry, someone would pick me up. Before I could finish, my cellmate Tony asked if I was just bragging. "No one's visited you in years. Someone's really gonna pick you up tomorrow?" I smiled and said nothing. Vivian might be tough on the outside, but she'd never leave me hanging. Sure enough, the next day, the moment the gate opened, I saw that familiar figure. He lunged into my arms and gave me a slap full of his unique style. I realized now that I could understand the vulnerability beneath her tough exterior. So I wasn't mad at all. I just wanted to say what I'd kept in my heart for years. "Vivian, I missed you. Not a day went by that I didn't think of you." After a while, she finally replied, "Me too." I swear, in my entire life, those words sounded just as sweet as, "Will you be with me?" Since Vivian had sold the house, we had to stay at a hotel temporarily. Vivian didn't waste my efforts. Under her management, the company had become a leading enterprise. Just from the decor in the penthouse suite, you could see how successful she'd become. She kicked off her high heels and busied herself in the kitchen. 20 minutes later, a bowl of horribly looking noodles sat in front of me. "Eat up, to ward off bad luck." In her expectant gaze, I finished even the broth. "How was it? Tasty?" Seeing the light in her eyes, I thought, forget it. It's the best noodles I've ever had. Her shoulders finally sagged as she let out a huge sigh of relief. After the meal, she insisted I take a bath. Vivian had grown superstitious. But as you know, I never argued with her. So I went without fuss. While I soaked, she leaned against the doorframe, detailing future plans for me. From which house was mine to what position I'd have at the company. Actually, I wasn't as broke as she thought. Before going to prison, I left myself 2 downtown buildings. Selling them would easily make me a few million. But I enjoyed being taken care of by her, so I listened quietly and didn't say a word. Most of our time together had been like that. She talked, I listened. This time was no different. But as soon as I put on my bathrobe and stepped out, she was already asleep on the bed. Probably too exhausted from her long trip back, she dozed off as soon as her head hit the pillow. I covered her with a blanket, not expecting her to be such a light sleeper now. She woke up the moment I moved. Her dark eyes fixed on me, filled with countless laughter. "Dry your hair first." Before I could react, she had already grabbed a towel and pushed me onto the sofa. She stood so close. I didn't dare to look up. My gaze could only rest on her second-to-last button. I couldn't figure out what exactly made my face so hot. Maybe it was the gentle touch from her fingertips, or maybe it was the scent that I had only encountered in dreams. I thought it might be better if I did it myself. But Vivian wouldn't let me, and she didn't see that this was a slow kind of torture for me. My hands had nowhere to go, and at some point, they brushed against my pants on the sofa. In my daze, a small square plastic packet fell to the ground. It was given to me by my cellmate Eric, who got out of prison the same day as me. He said it was about to expire after 3 years and that I should take it for emergencies. I guess now qualifies as an emergency. If I had a mirror, my face would be beet red. I quickly tried to explain, "This isn't what it looks like." "Ted, let's give it a try," she interrupted. Vivian's thought process had always been a bit different from others. While I was still wondering if she meant try getting together or something else, she had already started lifting my clothes. It wasn't until I saw the thermos on the bedside table wobbling that I came to my senses. Apparently, this is what she meant by "let's try." On the snow-white sheets, she intertwined her fingers with mine and our bodies melded together. It was something I had never dared to even imagine. I was holding on to her waist when Vivian suddenly kissed me. "Do you regret it?" She was asking if I regretted serving 15 years in prison for her. Regret? I'd asked myself that many times. But every time, the answer was so certain. I lowered my eyes, pressing my forehead against hers, tracing the contours of her inner shape with my body. "Do you regret it?" I asked. Regretting being with a broke ex-con like me. She understood what I meant. Turning her head, she stifled a laugh and then shook her head. The night was silent, except for soft moans and heavy breaths. After that, I still followed her around, helping with whatever she wanted to do. Of course, reaching this point, it was inevitable that some would try to challenge our relationship. At one art exhibit, a young guy complimented her beauty, hinting that she could use it as leverage to secure him as the representative for the company's new jewelry line in Asia. Vivian didn't say anything at first, she just beckoned me over with a finger. I jogged over and leaned on her shoulder. She smiled and said to the guy, "See this? You'll need to be at this level for me to even consider bending the rules." I suddenly felt grateful that I'd kept up my workouts over the years. So that night, I made an extra effort to show Vivian that she only needed me to break the rules with.